So if you remember from the beginning of this course, the typical graph of supply and demand, no, in which we have an interaction of both of these graphs, and there is a competitive equilibrium in which we have an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. We know how to find this by equating both equations. That is what happens when you have a competitive market. In competitive markets, you have a consumer surplus and you have a producer surplus. But if something affects the consumer surplus or the producer surplus, you will essentially have deadweight loss. And let's talk about the first government or policy intervention that we will discuss for this course, which is price controls. Price controls vary in many different ways. They are different types of mechanisms. Some regard price floors, other imply price ceilings, which are two different things. And that depends on the type of market you are talking about. So I place you a couple of examples. So there are different products that in different moments in time in Mexico, they have been affected by specific price controls. Tortillas, milk, gasoline, apartment rents, the minimum wage is a special kind of price control. This government introduced or reintroduced a very old from the 70s policy regarding what they call precios de garantía or some guaranteed prices, which are basically just price floors for certain agricultural products that are bought to certain agriculture groups. And so the idea here is that think of what happened, for example, like, what was this, like 12 years ago. And it was a moment when, for different reasons, the price of corn in the United States was increasing. And a lot of the corn we use to produce tortillas, we imported from the US because they're more efficient, a little bit making corn, but also because their farmers have much higher subsidies. But the point is that it's cheaper for everyone to buy corn from the US and produce tortillas that way. But there came a time when that cost was increasing because of the exchange rate and also because of specific things regarding the American economy. So suddenly, the kilos of tortillas were increasing in cost. And that created a potential political problem for then President Felipe Calderón, because that implied that people would be angry because tortillas are an essential element of Mexicans' diet. And if they become more expensive, people get angry. And if people get angry, they tend to vote for other parties. So they decided to establish a price ceiling, which is something that is a government law or a government mandate that as a tortilla vendor or seller, you can't sell the kilo of tortillas above this specific price ordered by the government. And that tends to be a price that would be below the equilibrium price, such that it helps out people that don't have as many resources. So the idea here is that this is what a price ceiling looks like. So imagine that the kilo of tortilla would cost in the equilibrium price, I don't know, 12 pesos or 14 pesos because of this increasing cost of production. But the government tells you through a law, you can't, or a kilo of tortilla can't be sold anywhere in the country above 8 pesos. So suddenly, if you are a supermarket, if you are a tortilleria, if you are a little tiendita, you can't sell the kilos of tortillas above 8 pesos, which is that horizontal line that reads price ceiling. If that is the case, that means that you can only recuperate costs up to 8 pesos per kilo. So if you are producing, or because you are importing a certain number of big kilos and kilos and kilos of flour from the corn or from the US at a higher price, you have to stop doing some of that because you will not recuperate all the costs and you will lose money. So what happens is that, as you see in the graph, a price ceiling distorts the market, because what happens is that consumers hear about the decree, it's being publicized in the media by the government or in different ads, and they tell you, No one can sell you the tortillas at more than 8 pesos. So you go to the store and you, okay, at that price, I can buy this amount of like X amount of tortillas, kilos of tortillas, QD in this graph. But the people that sell that can only recuperate the cost of a smaller fraction of their overall production because of this reduced price. And they are actually having to pay the higher costs in terms of their inputs. So what they do to avoid losing money is that they produce a smaller quantity, the quantity where they can actually recuperate their costs. In this case, QS. And that difference between what the consumers want to actually buy at this lower price, QD, and what the producers are willing to sell at this price, in other words, QS, that is called an excess of demand. And an excess of demand will only create a shortage of that product. You will go to the different stores, assuming you will find this product at this price, and oh, surprise, there is not sufficient units of that good, or they have sold out of that good because the producers only placed in the market a smaller fraction of the units needed to supply the demand because they would not be able to recuperate those costs. Therefore, any price ceiling that is below the equilibrium price, like the one shown in this graph, creates a situation that distorts the market and creates a deadweight loss, as the graph shows you. So imagine if the producers wanted to actually supply that level of demand. In other words, if they wanted to put on the market up to the QD units such that every consumer that wants the product at this new price P star can get it. Because of how they are having to absorb the costs that have not changed of those inputs, they would need to basically have a price which was more in line with the, I'm trying to draw a vertical line here. In order to satisfy that level QD, they would have to have a price which was more or less, it's actually being complicated by the menu, but it would be a very high price, more or less like here, such that they would cover all their costs, which are shown in the supply curve. It's actually higher than what I can draw because of the menu basically impedes me from being able to draw it all the way up. But the point is that to supply this level of quantity demanded by consumers, because of the higher costs they're facing, they would actually have to have a much higher price, more in around this area, around like this level of price, all the way here, wait, all the way here, to be able to actually cover their costs and not lose money. That's why, because they can do that, they can only sell at this lower price. They will only produce the level at which they cover their costs. In this case, this level where the supply curve intersects with the new price mandated by the government, which translates to this smaller level of supply. And the people that are actually able to buy those units that are available, these QS units, this level of units, or this number of units at this price, are really happy, because for these people, the consumer surplus expanded all the way to here. But for the producer surplus, the original producer surplus, which was here, now gets decreased to this green level, which is in the graph, which is a much smaller level. And in reality, this blue area that I'm shading is never realized, because the market runs out of units to be sold at the maximum level that suppliers provided. And this is this level. At QS, there's no more units available after QS. So none of this happens. And actually, the blue triangle here, the dark blue triangle there, is, as the sign reads, it's a deadweight loss. If there was no price control, no price ceiling, then let me erase everything. Then the original equilibrium would just be here. This would be, as in the previous slide, the consumer surplus. All of this big triangle from, or more like triangle trapezoid like this, would be the producer surplus, and that would be that. Obviously, at this price, producers would be happier because they would be giving or getting a bigger share of the market than consumers, than what it was before because of the increase in cost. But you would not have any extra additional distortions. And that is what was you could see here. That is what you could see there. Without any intervention from the government, consumer surplus would be smaller than the producer surplus. But let's remember that producers, firms, are run by people, they're owned by people, which are also part of society. So even if they receive, in this case, more part of the welfare, they are still a part of society. That's fine. They constitute part of your city, of your region, of your country. In this case, this is something fine. There's nothing wrong with this. What happens is that if this is prolonged for many years, you create inequality. But in this particular situation, in a present tense type moment, this is not bad. This is not inefficient.